She was just another passenger trying to catch a flight home. A woman in her late 40s, dressed in a comfortable but unremarkable travel tracksuit. She moved through the bustling airport terminal with the quiet, unassuming air of someone who had learned to be invisible. Her name was Sarah, and she carried no fancy luggage, only a well-worn duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a small backpack. To the weary travelers rushing past, to the desk agents, and to the security personnel, she was simply a face in the crowd, one of the thousands of souls processed through the metal detectors every single day. But as she approached the security checkpoint, a sharp-eyed Transportation Security Administration officer, a man named Kyler, with a reputation for being overly zealous, noticed something. It wasn't anything overt, no flashing lights or blaring alarms. It was the way she moved. There was a precision in her gait, an economy of motion that spoke of discipline. He saw it in the way her eyes scanned the room, not with the distracted glaze of a typical traveler, but with a calm, all-encompassing awareness. He nudged his colleague, a woman named Denise, and nodded towards Sarah. "See that one?" Kyler murmured, a smug grin playing on his lips. "Look at her. She's trying too hard to look casual. That's what they do, you know. The ones trying to smuggle something, they overcompensate." Denise squinted, unconvinced. "She looks like a high school gym teacher to me, Kyler. Just let her go through." "Trust me," he insisted, puffing out his chest a little. "I've got a sixth sense for this. We're doing a random enhanced screening. Let's pick her." Sarah placed her duffel bag and backpack onto the conveyor belt without being asked, a small act of routine cooperation. She walked through the metal detector without a beep. It was a clean pass, but Kyler was already committed. He stepped forward, his voice taking on the authoritative tone that came with his uniform. "Ma'am, step over here, please. We're going to need to do a pat-down." Sarah stopped, turning to face him with a calm, neutral expression. Her eyes, a piercing shade of blue, held his for a moment. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "No problem," Kyler said, enjoying the moment. "Just standard procedure. We'll also need to do a thorough search of your bags. Go on. Have a seat right over there." Sarah didn't move. "Officer, my bags are going to be just fine." I'm happy to wait while you run them through the X-ray again. But a pat-down is unnecessary." Kyler's grin widened, turning into a sneer. He glanced back at Denise, rolling his eyes as if to say, "See? I told you so. This was classic behavior. A compliant passenger doesn't argue. This woman was clearly hiding something." He turned back to Sarah, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ma'am, it's not up for debate. This is for the safety of everyone. My colleague is going to conduct the search. Go on, spread your arms." A flicker of something, was it amusement, crossed Sarah's face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She stood her ground. "I am asking you politely to reconsider. I am not a security risk, and I'm not carrying any contraband. This pat-down is an invasion of my privacy, and it is not based on any probable cause." This was the moment Kyler had been waiting for. He felt a rush of vindication. She was resisting. Law-abiding citizens didn't resist like this. He took a step closer, deliberately trying to loom over her. "Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but in this airport, in this line, I am in charge of security. And I say you're getting searched." He gestured grandly at his colleagues, raising his voice so other passengers could hear. "Don't worry, folks, just doing our job. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you have to watch. Go on. Search her." The humiliation was meant to be public. It was a power play, a way to assert dominance. A few travelers averted their eyes, uncomfortable. Others watched with mild curiosity. Denise, looking increasingly uncomfortable, stepped forward. "Ma'am, it'll just take a minute." Sarah held up a hand, a simple gesture that somehow stopped Denise in her tracks. The movement was calm, but it carried an unspoken authority. "No," she said. "It will not." Kyler scoffed. "And what are you going to do about it? Call your lawyer?" "Go ahead. In the meantime, you're delaying the line. If you don't comply, we'll have to call airport police, and you can miss your flight in a holding cell." Sarah reached slowly into the pocket of her jacket. Kyler tensed, his hand instinctively moving towards the radio on his belt. But Sarah didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small, leather-bound wallet and flipped it open, holding it up for him to see. On one side was a gleaming gold badge. On the other, yes, an official Department of Defense identification card with her photo and a rank that made Kyler's stomach drop to his feet. The badge wasn't for a captain or a commander. It was the star of a rear admiral, upper half, a 2-star admiral, and the letters embossed next to her name read USN, United States Navy. But it was the insignia on the badge itself, a golden eagle clutching a trident, that stole the breath from his lungs. This wasn't just any admiral. This was a naval special warfare officer, a SEAL. The bustling noise of the terminal seemed to fade into a dull hum. Kyler stared, his face draining of all color. The smug grin was gone, replaced by the slack-jawed look of a man watching his entire world collapse in on itself. The words he had just spoken, "Go on, search her," echoed in his mind, not as a command, but as a life sentence of embarrassment. Sarah's voice, when she spoke again, was no louder than before, but it cut through the silence with the sharpness of a blade. "Officer, my name is Rear Admiral Sarah Jenkins, United States Navy. I am the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. My entire career has been dedicated to the security of this nation. I have planned and led operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. I have been searched by armed guards in hostile territories, and I have searched others. I know the protocols. I know the law. And I know that this," she said, gesturing to the checkpoint, "is harassment." Kyler couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked at Denise, who was staring at the badge with wide, horrified eyes. He looked back at Sarah, hoping. I'm praying that this was some elaborate, expensive prank, but the quiet, undeniable authority in her gaze told him it was not. Admiral Jenkins slowly put her badge away. She reached again into her pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to the speechless Kyler. It had a single phone number on it, no name. "That is the direct line to the Judge Advocate General's office at the Pentagon," she said. "You will call them, right now. You will explain to them exactly what happened here, from the moment you first saw me. You will tell them about your sixth sense, about the pat-down you demanded without cause, and about how you attempted to publicly humiliate a woman for the simple act of traveling. You will do this before I get on my plane." She then looked at Denise, her expression softening just a fraction. "Miss, I would like my bags now, please. I have a connecting flight to make." Denise scrambled to the conveyor belt, grabbing Sarah's duffel and backpack and practically running back to hand them to her. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Admiral, I'm so sorry." Admiral Jenkins took her bags. She didn't look at Kyler again. She simply walked away from the checkpoint, heading towards her gate. Behind her, she left a stunned silence, and a security officer whose hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the radio he was now forced to use to call his supervisor. The entire incident, from start to finish, had lasted less than 3 minutes. But for Kyler, it was a lifetime of regret, all because he thought he could intimidate a quiet woman in a tracksuit. And the call Kyler made from the secure office behind the checkpoint was the longest 10 minutes of his life. His supervisor, a harried-looking woman named Margaret, stood over him, her arms crossed, her face a mask of barely controlled fury as she listened to his stammering confession on the speakerphone. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional, and utterly terrifying. It belonged to a Navy captain, a senior legal advisor at the Pentagon. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His quiet, precise questions were like scalpels, dissecting Kyler's account of the events and exposing every flaw, every bit of unprofessionalism, every leap of unjustified logic. "Officer, you stated you selected the Admiral for a secondary screening based on her demeanor and the way she walked. Can you please articulate for the record what specific behaviors in her demeanor were consistent with the profile of a security threat you have been trained to identify?" Kyler wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. She was too aware. She was looking around. "Passengers are instructed to be aware of their surroundings, officer. It's part of our See Something, Say Something campaign. Is that the only justification?" And she argued. She wouldn't just comply. She politely requested that you reconsider a search for which you had no probable cause. That is not an argument. That is the exercise of her civil rights. Is there anything else? Kyler was silent. There was nothing else. Just his own arrogance. The captain on the phone then spoke to Margaret, his tone shifting to one of grim formality. "Ma'am, Admiral Jenkins is not pressing charges at this time. However, she has instructed me to convey her expectations very clearly. She expects a full review of your officer's training and his fitness for duty. She expects a written protocol review to be submitted to her office within 30 days, outlining the steps your agency will take to prevent the profiling of passengers based on arbitrary and non-threatening characteristics. And she expects Officer Kyler to complete a mandatory re-education course on civil rights and implicit bias. Admiral Jenkins believes in second chances, but she also believes in accountability. We will be following up." The line went dead. Margaret turned to Kyler, her expression one of pure disgust. "Get out of my sight," she whispered. "Go home. You're suspended pending investigation. And pray that Admiral's idea of a second chance is more generous than mine." Meanwhile, high above the clouds, Admiral Sarah Jenkins sat in the first-class cabin of her connecting flight. She had been upgraded by a flustered gate agent who had recognized her name on the manifest and had practically begged to be allowed to make amends. She had a glass of water in her hand and was staring out the window at the endless expanse of white clouds, her mind a million miles away from the petty drama at the security checkpoint. Her thoughts were on a different kind of pressure, a different kind of scrutiny. They were on the men and women under her command, the ones currently deployed in locations she couldn't even speak aloud. Her life was a world of extreme life-or-death decisions. She had walked into rooms with the most powerful people on the planet and delivered briefings that could alter the course of foreign policy. She had stood on the decks of aircraft carriers, watching her teams prepare for missions where the margin for error was zero. She had endured things that would break most people, both physically and mentally. A pat-down in an airport? It was, in the grand scheme of things, an inconvenience, an annoyance. But it wasn't about the pat-down itself. It was about the principle. It was about the attitude. It was about a man in a uniform, drunk on a tiny amount of power, who saw a woman alone and assumed she was an easy target for his petty tyranny. She had seen that same look before, in the eyes of petty warlords and corrupt officials in failed states. It was the look of someone who confused the authority of their position with their own personal worth. And it was a look she had spent her entire life fighting against, in one form or another. She thought about her own journey. She hadn't started out wanting to be an admiral. She hadn't even started out wanting to be a SEAL. She had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a farmer. She was tough, she was smart, and she had a fierce competitive streak that made her excel in every sport she tried. But the idea of the military, of leaving the only home she'd ever known, felt like a distant fantasy. Then, during her senior year of high school, a recruiter came to speak. He wasn't like the others. He didn't just talk about college money and travel. He talked about challenge. He talked about pushing yourself past limits you didn't know you had. He talked about being part of an elite brotherhood. He was a Navy SEAL, and for the first time, Sarah saw a path forward, a way to channel her restlessness and her strength into something meaningful. The road was brutal. The obstacles weren't just physical, they were institutional. The idea of a woman in the teams was, for decades, considered not just impossible, but absurd by the old guard. She had faced skepticism, outright hostility, and discrimination at every turn. She had been told she was too small, too weak, too emotional. She had been tested, hazed, and pushed to her breaking point by instructors who were hoping she would quit. She had seen other women, incredibly talented women, wash out under the pressure, and not because they couldn't handle the physical demands, but because they couldn't handle the constant grinding isolation and the feeling of not belonging. But Sarah had something else. It wasn't just physical strength. It was a deep, unshakable core of stubbornness. Every time someone told her she couldn't do something, it only made her more determined to prove them wrong. She learned to let the words wash over her, to use the doubt as fuel. She learned that the only opinion that mattered was her own, and the opinion of the teammates who bled beside her. And slowly, painfully, she earned their respect. Not because she was a woman, but because she was a leader. Because she was the first one up and the last one to sleep. Because she never asked anyone to do something she wouldn't do herself. Because in the field, when the rounds were flying, she was the calmest person in the room. The incident in the airport was just a microcosm of her entire life. It was the same old story. A person in a position of power, making a baseless assumption based on a superficial judgment. This time, the target just happened to be someone with the rank and the resources to push back. It was a small victory, but a satisfying one. Not for her ego, but for the message it sent. That you never know who you're dealing with. That quiet strength is still strength. And that dignity once earned should never be surrendered to a petty tyrant with a badge and a smug grin. As the plane began its descent, Sarah's phone pinged with a secure message. It was an update from her command. An operation was in its final planning stages. She had a briefing in the morning. The airport was already a fading memory, replaced by the familiar, welcome pressure of the job she was born to do. She was going home, not to a house, but to a world of purpose, where her decisions carried real weight, and where the only thing that mattered was the mission and the people she was privileged to lead. The secure briefing room at the Naval Special Warfare Command was a world away from the fluorescent glare of the airport terminal. Here, the air was cool and still, the walls lined with flat-screen monitors showing maps, satellite imagery, and real-time intelligence feeds. The only sounds were the low hum of the ventilation system and the measured voices of the men and women seated around the polished oak table. At the head of that table sat Admiral Sarah Jenkins, her travel tracksuit replaced by the crisp, the starched uniform of her rank. On her chest were rows of ribbons, each one a testament to a lifetime of service, of valor, of sacrifice. The gold special warfare insignia, the very same eagle clutching a trident that had so terrified the security guard, was pinned above them. The officers in the room, a mix of senior SEAL commanders, intelligence analysts, and support staff, treated her with a deference that was absolute. It wasn't the fearful deference of subordinates. It was the earned respect of professionals for a leader who had proven herself time and again in the most unforgiving arena on earth. When she spoke, they listened. When she asked a question, they had answers. This was her world, a world of order, of discipline, of life and death consequence. The briefing was for a complex operation, or the extraction of a CIA intelligence team that had been compromised deep inside hostile territory. The details were classified beyond top secret. The margins for error were measured in seconds. The potential for loss was staggering. Sarah listened to the plan, her eyes moving from the maps to the faces of the young commanders who would be leading the assault teams. She saw the excitement in their eyes, the eagerness. She also saw the flicker of fear, the one they all worked so hard to hide. "Commander Harris," she said, her voice quiet in the large room, cutting through the presentation. "Your insertion point. The LZ is hot. The satellite imagery from 20 minutes ago shows increased anti-aircraft activity. What's your alternate?" The young commander, a seasoned operator with multiple deployments under his belt, didn't hesitate. Ma'am, we have a secondary LZ 2 clicks east. It's a tougher terrain, a longer hump to the objective, but it puts us outside the range of their known SHORAD systems." "And your extraction plan from that point?" "We have 2 CV-22s on standby. If we go in at the secondary LZ, we'll need them to refuel en route. It adds 30 minutes to the timeline." Sarah nodded, processing the information. 30 minutes is an eternity in a firefight. I want a third option. Can we get a submarine-launched UAV overhead to provide persistent surveillance? I need real-time eyes on those anti-aircraft batteries from the moment your birds cross the border. If they so much as warm up a radar, I want to know about it. And I want you to have the authority to abort the mission and extract the team by land. And we have a friendly tribal leader 50 miles to the north. He owes us a favor. Let's put that option in the playbook." The room was silent as the weight of her words sank in. She wasn't just approving a plan, she was improving it, adding layers of redundancy, and most importantly, prioritizing the lives of her people over the mission's success. This was the kind of thinking that had earned her the unwavering loyalty of every SEAL under her command. She wasn't a desk jockey pushing pins on a map. She was a warrior who understood that the best plans were the ones that brought everyone home. The briefing continued for another 2 hours. When it was over, Sarah dismissed the staff, but asked Commander Harris to stay behind. When they were alone, the formal atmosphere softened, just a fraction. And Harris had been one of her junior lieutenants years ago, and she had watched him grow into a superb leader. "How's your family, Tom?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. He smiled, the tension of the briefing leaving his face. "Good, ma'am. The kids are growing like weeds. My youngest, she just started kindergarten. Sarah, actually. We named her after you." Sarah's stern expression melted into a genuine, warm smile. "You didn't. Tom, that's one of the greatest honors I've ever received." "She's a handful," he laughed, "stubborn as a mule. My wife says she gets it from her namesake." "Stubbornness is an underrated virtue in this line of work," Sarah said, her mind flickering unbidden to the security checkpoint. "It's not about being inflexible. It's about knowing your worth and not letting anyone tell you any different. It's about standing your ground when you know you're right, even when the person in front of you has all the power, or thinks they do." Harris sensed there was a story behind the words, but he knew better than to ask. "Yes, ma'am?" They talked for a few more minutes about the operation, about the men, about the myriad small details that could mean the difference between success and failure. As Harris stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Admiral, for what it's worth, the men talk. They know you have their backs, not just in the field, but everywhere. It means more than you know. After he left,